What's up guys, DukeSloth here, and today we're talking about pro advice for junglers in Season 5. Now, this is a bit of an unusual format. I'm going to do this more like my patch notes. Let me know in the comments down below if you prefer it this way or with gameplay footage in the background. I'll adjust accordingly. Just want to test out how you like this one. So what has been happening is Hi-Rez has released some tier lists basically from their employees, and they got a bit of bad backlash from the pros. And I think based on that, this it came to pass. Basically a guide or some sort of tutorial from pros in how to get into a role that you're unfamiliar with or new to, or as a returning player, how to get into that role again that you were playing before, that kind of stuff. I think there's some very interesting information in here, not just for beginners, but also for advanced players. And I thought it was worth going through that and also giving these articles a bit more of a spotlight. They exist or will exist for every single role. And I think a lot of people don't even know about them. I think they're a great resource. So I want to talk about them a little more, and also obviously add my own input to the topic, discuss some things regarding the leveling order and builds, etc. Let's jump into it. We'll skip through some parts that are more like introduction and just get to the core of things. So, first of all, ideal guards and skill advice for new players. Before asking our pros to break down some of the more complex aspects of the jungler role, we had them tell us which guards they believe are the easiest to pick up when you're first starting out and how to level those guards properly. Which junglers are good for a new player to use? Qfred said Thor, Mercury and Nemesis. Homiefe said Nemesis, Hunbats and Thor, so twice Nemesis, twice Thor already. All fairly simple guards and good guards to play if you're just starting off. Adapting recommends Nemesis, Circadian and Ratatoska to new players. They have relatively simple kits and they offer some variety in playstyle, which in turn helps expand the player's game sense, which should translate when picking other characters. Ice Ice Baby says 3 guards for new players that are easy for the jungle role are Nemesis, Bastet and Hunbats. Scream says Thor, Bastet and Awilish. Captain Twig says for new players I recommend Ratatoska, Hunbats and Mercury. And Weekend says Nemesis, Thanatos and Daji. So Cat would be top, but more difficult to play. What you see here, there's also a big difference between a lot of these cards already. The one that everyone seems to agree on is definitely Nemesis. Hunbats gets quite a few mentions. Thor gets quite a few mentions as the first assassin that you have as well. I would definitely agree with Nemesis, definitely a great starter guard. I think Thor is nice to get down the attack cancel mechanic and also have like some overall standard guard that can always be picked to some degree at least and kind of teaches you the essentials of jungles really well. Then the other ones seem to be more like flavors of the individual player. Like Hunbats, I also think is a good beginner guard. With, for example, Mercury, I wouldn't see him as a beginner guard. I wouldn't see Sir Cat as a beginner guard, though a very strong guard. Ratatoska, maybe, but also not the first guard I'd point someone to. Likewise, Awilish can be very strong, is very good on lower levels of play, but maybe not the first guard you want to play. So all a bit, yeah, depending on who you are and what kind of guards you like playing, what kind of playstyle you have as well. I would also not agree on Daji because the ultimate is something you have to get used to really, but Thanatos at the same time I think could have a few more mentions here. I think Thanatos is a very good guard to start off. I feel like some of the junglers here may have not mentioned him on purpose, or some of the pros, because a lot of people just start with Thanatos and get stuck with him. Next point. What do these beginner-friendly guards bring to the table and what's the best order for maxing their abilities? On Thor, Qfred says the 1, the 3, the 4 and then the 2. I will say that depending on the matchup, etc., you can also level the 3 before you 1. Makes it a little bit easier to have some confirmable damage, especially now that it has a lower cooldown. On Mercury, the 1, the 2, the 4 and the 3, I can absolutely see that. Nemesis, the 2, 4, 3, 1. I think I would prioritize the ultimate when I can put points into it, but other than that, definitely the order I would go for. Homiefe, Nemesis brings guaranteed damage while also having the versatility to engage on any target with her ultimate. On Nemesis, my skill order would be 4, 2, 3, 1. That's the one that I would agree with more as well. Hunbats gives your team a potent team fight and skirmish ultimate and has multiple ways of engaging fights, which is 3, 1 or blink ult. On Hunbats, my skill order would be 2, 3, 4, 1. I agree with this order as well. That's what I level in 95% of my games. You can max the 1 earlier though in order to get the slow higher. Thor brings a high amount of crowd control and a semi-global ultimate. On Thor, my skill order would be 3, 1, 2, 4. What I mentioned before as well. The other option basically depends on the matchup really, and if you get stunned out of the 3 a lot or something like that. Adapting, Nemesis 4, 2, 3, 1. Talked about this. Circuit 4, 1, 2, 3. I think Circuit is one of those cards where there's really no discussion about the leveling order at all. So that's pretty much the only one you should ever go for. Red Tusker either 2, 4, 3, 1 or 2, 4, 1, 3. Now this is interesting because I definitely think that Red Tusker has a lot of flexibility with this leveling order. I think you can if you really want to even max the 3 first. I wouldn't recommend it in most situations. I think the 2 with this protection shred is too potent, but it takes a bit to be completely hit, whereas the 3 is instant hit basically. It can definitely help to have some points in the 1 at earlier stages as well for the extra slow, but usually you don't want to do that. And well, depending on how aggressively you can use the 1, it offers a larger slow for the trade of DPS from the 3. It's the point that Adapting is making here, and that's definitely what I think as well. You don't really want to max the 1 first, as the dash will usually not be the best clearing tool, and you'd rather have that for mobility, because it's also your only escape. Ice Ice Baby has a lot to say. Starting off with Nemesis. She's an all-around very strong guard with the potential to go both on squishy backliners or frontliners if need be. Her abilities are easy to hit, so it's easy for new players to not completely miss their skills and be use of the team in fights. The general playstyle you should aim for on this goddess is to flank the enemy backliners in most scenarios and try to take out the ADC or hunter player. If you catch someone off guard or in rotation and you have all your abilities up, you can go for the kill as long as you know that they're indeed alone. Her skill priority should be 4, 2, 3, 1. Starting with your 2 at level 1 and followed up by the 1 on level 2. On Bastet, skill order should be 2, 3, 1, 4. The idea behind that order is the 2 does the most damage, so it's handy to max it, following it up with the 3 because it's a ranged ability, so you don't have to put yourself in danger to poke, and then the 1 so you don't feel like you need to jump in and poke, since it's your only form of escape. I will say something about that afterwards because somebody else talks about Bastet as well. Cats are mainly used to slow down a person rather than DPS them or just tank a tower. Playstyle wise, starting from early to late game, and this kind of applies to all gods in the jungle currently, you want to farm as fast and efficiently as possible. Meaning go from camp to camp, on cooldown and clear it. If nothing is up, then share a wave with a mid laner or solo laner. Once you reach level 5, you can be more proactive on the map and look for ganks. Solo laners are usually the easiest to kill, but ganks in mid and duo, if that's where you find yourself to be, are also viable. Again, your priority should be farming. So don't go out of your way if you're on speed or blue to make a rotation to duo lane and gank, just because someone is complaining and wants a gank. As far as team fights go, your main targets should be backliners, and the playstyle is similar to Nemesis. The only difference is you can do AoE ability damage, while Nemesis is more oriented around AAs and chopping down the targets. You want to jump in on the backliners in a flanking fashion. With your first ability, use your 2 and 3 and jump out. Use your ult only if the mid laner and ADC are not stacked, since it's really easy to kill them, and they can also use them as a way to heal back up, since most ADCs go lifesteal. Going into Hunbats, start with your 2 on level 1 and going into your 3 on level 2, then your 1. I will say that this is usually true, but if you feel like you could get invaded, aggressed on very early into the game, maybe not so much in the current meta, but generally speaking, then putting a point at your 1 second is also an option and still gives you a decent amount of clear. If you feel like the enemy jungler is looking for a fight and wants to pressure you out, you'd want to have your escape up. Otherwise, get another point in tier 2 for faster buff clear and mana efficiency. Maxing abilities should be in this order: 4, 2, 3, 1. Hunbats is similar to Bastet, with the one difference being your ult is really important in team fights and it's a must to level it. Playstyle wise, again look for flanks. Hunbat's best teamfight ability is his ult, and it's really easy to hit someone because of his large radius. He's a bit more difficult to play in terms of where to focus in teamfights compared to Bastet, since you have more options. Using the ult to separate backliners and frontliners is a very smart way to dislocate enemies and collapse on their frontline with your team. Another way is if you go for the backline, if you know the backlines do not have beats, you can safely ult just them and go for them for the kill using your 2 and 3 with auto attacks in between, so you can utilize the crit chance your passive gives and a Deathbringer in case you have it in your build. So it's important here, one basic attack after each ability to proc the passive. That should maybe be a bit clear. The most common way of getting into fights is via blink, but walking in is another option. Just try to avoid jumping in, since late game you're very squishy and by the time you try to ult, you might already be dead. Scream. Thor, Bastet and Awilish are easy for new players because they are pretty straightforward and don't have the intricacies that most other assassins do. Thor, 3-1-4-2, we've talked about this. Bastet, 2-4-1-3. This is a different order from what we've heard before from Ice Ice. So I think that's an interesting point here. Scream goes into the 4 very early. He utilizes the cats more, the cat's damage and everything. He also maxes the 1 before the 3. He's not looking for the range poke. And I personally think that's a bit more of a viable choice for Bastet's playstyle in particular. Range poke is nice, but you're barely or rarely ever looking for a lot of ranged poke on Bastet. That's not how you play in most situations, but rather you want to burst and target the moment you jump on them. I actually have sometimes leveled the 1 before the 2 as well. The 1 deals a little bit less damage, but different from the 2, it's the first ability you hit, so the first damage you confirm, and it also is instant, whereas the bleed can basically be Aegis or something like that. It can be countered easier, healed against, as it takes a while to tick through. So really, I would probably not go with Ice leveling order and more with Screams most of the time, and I think Scream is the primary Bastet player that we know, so I would probably focus more on this one. And Awilish, 2-3-4-1. On Awilish, especially on lower levels of play, you can also definitely go for the 4 before the 3, the ultimate, just because it allows you to get this massive steroid off and you get more pulls off on lower levels of play because people don't beat as much. Captain Twig, with Red, I'd max 2-4-3-1. Same thing here. With Butts, I'd recommend 4-2-3-1. And with Mercury, 4-1-2-3. I had a little bit of a different order before that. Guess depends on how much you want to rely on your ultimate or not. Definitely want to max the 1 very early on though. And the 3 could at a time be maxed to clear lanes quicker before the 2, but now the 2 is just better in every regard because you barely ever have to clear lanes. Red brings a ton of early pressure to the team while having a ton of mobility. He also has the ability to slow, stun and shred the opponent's protections. Hunbaz is a fantastic late-game teamfight character who can farm up during the early game and has a huge AoE ult that can change the direction of a teamfight completely. Mercury has a quick clear and great ganks while also having enough damage throughout the game. High enough damage is a bit of an understatement here because in late game he has massive damage. Nemesis, Thanatos and Daji have the potential to do extremely well in teamfights, but also have the ability to 1v1 and stomp with a lead. Nemesis 2-4-3-1, Thanatos 1-4-3-2. This is interesting because I would always level the 2 before the 3 on Thanatos. Just the extra movement speed, extra penetration, giving you more damage as well. Should in most situations pay off more as long as you remember to use your 2 enough. If you don't really use your 2, then maxing the 3 is definitely better if you feel like the 2 is something you're more used to roam around. Daji 2-1-3-4. With Daji, I will say her leveling order is a bit awkward in the sense that most of the damage in fights comes from a 1, but a 2 is better for clearing. Right now, you can sometimes get away with like 4 points in the 2 and then maxing the 1. And also, you can consider putting more points into the ultimate earlier on. The ultimate per rank can get up to 300 extra damage. That is very theoretical damage though, because for that to happen, you have to hit 3 targets with 1 chain each and pull them all. You can even get more if you hit multiple targets with 1 chain, but that's never going to happen. Usually you will have targets cleansing, beatsing, aegising, or whatever when they get chained. And if you're not going for the instant pull, so you just chain 1 person and pull them immediately, you might not get much damage off with the ability, but rather burn relics and stuff like that. So I would say the ult can be considered as an earlier leveling thing, just depends on the situation. Which guards would you say are the strongest overall in the jungle role right now? Kyofred, Nemesis, Daji, and Hunbats are doing very well in the jungle at the given time. I think they're doing very well. I don't think they are the strongest. We get to that. Humiafe, I believe Serket is probably the strongest jungler right now. She provides the ability to invade deep jungle without getting punished. She has the fastest clear time in the jungle and she can outduel every assassin in the jungle. I fully agree with all these points and I think Serket is definitely one of the strongest right now. Adapting, the overall strongest jungle guard right now is up for debate, and with the SPL coming up, there's no way I'm telling you. Also very understandable. Ice Ice Baby, Habois is definitely the strongest jungler currently. However, if we consider this to be for new players or beginners, you have to really be aware of your positioning as Habwa. So I'd say Nemesis is the strongest god for a beginner. You have a dash, an ult that takes away protection and health, and a shield that reflects damage and heals you back up. So getting in bad positions doesn't necessarily mean death. And also, she's a really easy god given her kit, and the hardest thing to do is probably AA cancel with a 3, which is not very hard either. I can fully agree on this assessment of Nemesis, and I also think that Habwa is very high in the terms of the current meta for jungling. I would put him like very close to Socket levels. Scream, not sure on the best guard yet, but most of them feel very viable to an extent. Also very true, almost any jungler at this point is viable. Captain Twig, the strongest overall I'd say is Socket. The jungle clear and gank potential are unrivaled. Weaken, Socket on Nemesis are the strongest right now. So, verdict I would, based on this, give is, even though they are not all mentioned as like the same frequency, Socket, Habwa, and Nemesis. Heads up, new players. Our pros agree that Nemesis is a great pick, whether you're looking for a beginner-friendly god or a very viable jungle pick. But also want to consider someone like Hunbatz or Socket if you're like a bit more of a challenge. For my recommendations, check out the jungle tier list or don't. Ideal item builds for junglers. With an idea of who our pros believe are the most powerful and easiest to learn junglers, let's dig into what builds they suggest for clearing those camps and ganking your unsuspecting opponents. 1 second here. What's a solid starting build to run in the jungler role? Right now a good starting build would be Assassin's Blessing, Mace, 2 health pots and 1 mana pot. This start gives you the best level 1 clear and helps you build into the Crusher after your boots. If the god you're playing isn't great with Crusher, you can start Katana instead of a Mace with 1 less pot. For starter items adapting, I would recommend Assassin's Blessing paired with either Transcendence Part 1 or and 3 health, 2 mana potions, or Boots Part 1 with 4 health and 2 mana potions. Scream, a solid start build for jungle usually is Assassin's Blessing and Transcendence on junglers that need mana and CDR. If that's not the case, usually Crusher Jones are the other pickups, so tier 1 Mace. Captain Twig, as a jungler, I'd always recommend starting Assassin's Blessing with either Morningstar, Katana, or Mace, depending on what you like to build later. Also a health potion and a multi-potion. Weaken, starting build is Assassin's Blessing, rank 1 Heartseeker, and 2 health pots. So what you see here is there's a high variation in how many health pots they recommend. Really depends on the playstyle, I guess. I think especially to beginner, like the more you can get, the better. You don't want to do it like over the top. If you get more than 3 health pots, you might want to consider changing up your playstyle a little bit. But overall, what we see is, I think what Captain Twig summed up very well. You have Assassin's Blessing in any situation, and then you have your choice of Morningstar, Katana, or Mace. But Adapting also pointed out that you can also go for Boots. I think there's still some merit to going for Boots, because while it doesn't give you quite the same clearing speed, it still gives you more rotating speed, and it gives you the opportunity to catch an enemy early in the game when, for example, they are Hunbatz and you are Thanatos. They may have some more power, but you as Thanatos have those high base damage values and the self-heal and everything, and you can chase them much better with the movement speed that you get. So in some situations, that can still be a good option. Overall, it seems to be more of a tendency to go into a single damage item, but then finish up your boots before you finish that damage item. This is very important. You want the mobility as fast as possible. The reason you're not going Boots 1 is because Boots 1 is very expensive now and doesn't offer the highest value anymore. Boots 2, Boots 3 are still just as good as before, basically. So it's just something for the start of the game to consider. What's a safe build choice at the moment for junglers? First 3 core items. Cool Fed, Warrior Tabi, Transcendence, Jotun's Wrath give a lot of power and cooldown reduction, which greatly benefits all ability-based junglers. Very straightforward, fully agree. On Miafe, the most standard first 3 items right now are Warrior Tabi, Crusher, and Heartseeker. Those 3 items combined give you a lot of burst damage to fully kill a carry with your entire kit. I think this is interesting because I would probably recommend having at least 1 higher power item like Transcendence if you want to go for this build as well. Simply due to the fact that Crusher and Heartseeker both scale off power to some degree. Not fully, and they still do a lot of damage early. It's definitely not a bad choice. But I think that Transcendence is really good as a jungler right now, and this item combination really benefits from Transcendence, but you can still build it at 4th slot anyways. Adapting, a safe build when playing Assassins is to generally look at the penetration tree. Always start up with finishing your boots. I'd recommend warrior tabbing 99% of the time. Then build into either Transcendence, Hydras, Crusher, Brawlers, Jotuns, or Heartseeker. I personally like to build Transcendence as Heartseeker for the mana sustain paired with movement speed, plus the poke burst potential of Heartseeker. What's also interesting is that this also offers you a decent amount of penetration. Crusher is a very strong option if you feel like you don't need the mana, or a Brawlers if the enemy have guards with healing. This is always important. If they're healing, just go for Brawlers. No reason not to. There's no set build, so don't be afraid to try different orders on the items. If you back and have enough to finish an item, example Hydras over Transcendence, that can be more beneficial as you will get your power spike earlier on instead of delaying it. Definitely worth considering, especially because Transcendence no longer is as dependent on the stacks. Scream, any build is usually solid with a combo of Mace Tree and Katana Tree for Assassins, and maybe a defense item somewhere in there. Captain Twig, a build you can't go wrong with would be Warrior Tabby into completing a Transcendence followed by a Jones Wrath. We can finish your boots first, then Heartseeker, then Crusher. So we see two paths, either like the Transcendence Jones TDR path or the High Aggression Heartseeker Crusher path or something in between. Ice Baby. For a god like Nemesis, considering the crit meter will potentially go away from the next patch, I'd give a more standard penetration AA-oriented build working in pretty much all situations regardless of the enemy team comps, with a few replacements in certain scenarios. So starting off, you want to have Assassin's Blessing with a Mace, which will later turn into Jones, 2 health pots and 1 mana. Before finishing the Jones, get Power Boots. Once you finish your boots, you can proactively look for ganks, but still be mainly focused on farming. With the current way buffs spawn and the speed it takes to clear them, you want to do them on cooldown. After Jotuns, transition into a Stone-Cutting Sword and Hasten Katana Tree. I will say that Stone-Cutting Sword is nice, but I wouldn't say it's always that necessary anymore, just throwing that out. That's why you, obviously, if you want to go for the Hasten Katana Nemesis build, you can also go for that first at this point. It has a lot of stats that help you right now. At the same time, not every Nemesis build has Hasten Katana. Execution and Bloodforge should be the last 2 items. Once fully built, you'll be killing backliners in no time. Also, frontliners won't take too long before dying as well. Relic choices should be Blink and Beats on Nemesis almost every scenario, they're viable. If there's not a lot of CC on the enemy team, you can safely start with Blink to give you that extra mobility to gank or even use it to farm efficiently, blinking from one camp to another, which not many players utilize. This is always interesting to me. You'll see this on a pro level of play, that really the pros literally blink through the camps when they know they won't need their blink all too soon and just maximize their farm that way. Most people will see that and think it's a misplay, but it's actually been used more and more because early on there aren't that many opportunities to really utilize their blink, and when you can use it, why not? Building a god like Bastet, Assassin's Blessing, and Mace is the best DPS option early on. Pots should be 2 health and 1 mana. Later on, you should continue into full boots before finishing your Mace into Jones, then go into Transcendence. I'll say that you can also do that the other way around, depending. Damage-wise, it ends up being almost the same. The power spike is a little bit earlier with Jones because it's a little bit cheaper. This would be the core 3 items you need on Bastet. Later on, you want more pen and more power on her, since her scaling is really good at 100% on all 3 abilities. So you want, in most scenarios, a Heartseeker, Brawlers, and Titans. This way, you do a lot of damage to backliners and frontliners with all that pen and power. Starting build and overall build for a god like Hunbatz should be similar to Bastet, with one difference being, instead of Brawlers or Titans, you can swap out one for a Deathbringer, since his passive does give an extra crit chance, so you can utilize and give yourself a big damage boost if the dice roll in your favor. So a simulation build would be full boots, Jotuns, Transcendence, Heartseeker, Titan's Bane, and Deathbringer. Another viable option is Hydras, but it's better to have that extra pen in my opinion, since pretty much Transcendence this season takes the role of Hydras and gives you the extra CDR. I will say that I think Hydras is still very, very viable, especially if you go into a build with Transcendence and Heartseeker. You can consider just sacrificing that little bit of cooldown reduction from Joltons and going into Hydras, because Hydras gives you a lot of extra damage if you're going for a crit build. If you really want to build Deathbringer, then Hydras will give you so much more burst, because the multipliers of Hydras and Deathbringer basically stack on top of each other, and the crit's just gonna insane. And a ridiculous amount of burst, and especially if you have Transcendence as well, it can chunk so much, and it's just a single basic attack. The consensus is clear. Power and penetration are the name of the game when it comes to jungling in Season 5. Items like Jolton's Wrath, Heartseeker, and Transcendence are popular right now for helping you sustain yourself while you shred through enemies. If you want some other suggestions on what items you should consider in the jungle role, check out our guide for building assassins in Season 5 for even more info. I will also say what's unfortunately not touched upon here very much are the AA assassins. Typically on gods like Bakasura or Kali or Arachne, even to some degree, you want to build a bit differently. Arachne can kind of lean towards the Nemesis build, but especially Bakasura and Kali want to have other items, more attack speed. They're just not that meta, so I guess they're not talked about much here, but keep that in mind. You don't want to build them with the same power CDR build as the others. Strategy and meta insights for junglers. You know what gods or pros are favoring, and you know how to build them. But what else should you be aware of when it comes to strategy and playstyle as a jungler? Let's dive into some meta-focused tips and tricks what these seasoned Smite vets were willing to share. What are 3 quick tips for what players should focus on in the jungle role? Cure Fred, it's very situational whether to gank or farm. It's important hitting power spikes, but also trying to build leads in lanes or help them catch up. Homeafe, some quick tips for jungle I have are farm your jungle efficiently, understand your character and what it does best, and also understand other roles as well. You as a jungler decide who can get a lead and who can be put behind. So understanding which lane would be the most valuable to put ahead is important. I will say that on lower levels, it's not always easy to see who you can actually put ahead. Sometimes you can give a lane a kill, you can give a lane 2 kills or 2 assists, and they will still not be able to get ahead because the opponent is just significantly better than them, and that's always going to be an issue. So until a certain level of play, I would always consider just trying to get yourself ahead as the jungler over lanes, while still keeping that in mind for when you see an opportunity to get someone ahead. If you have like a very even lane, then that's something where you can actually get benefit out of it. But in many situations, you can basically just go with the gank that works for you, where the enemy is out of position, rather than considering which lane you want to get ahead. Adapting. My biggest tips for jungling are learn how to farm well, keep track of what the enemy jungler is doing, and try to figure out the best way to counter that. Invade, counter gank. Ice Ice Baby. So, 3 quick tips for jungle. In the current meta and new map, buffs are cleared really easily. So the most important thing you want to do and keep track of is buff timers and clearing buffs on respawn. As a jungler, you don't have to have a lane to constantly leash from, and with the Season 5 updates, is less effective to 2-man share, so buffs are your main source of XP and gold. Second tip, be mana efficient. A lot of times, people don't realize how much damage their skills do and overuse abilities, which translate into a lack of mana, which will hurt your farming efficiency. This tip is mostly centered around early game, since most junglers do get Transcendence or are AA based, so they need to use abilities that much. I think this is really not as much of an issue anymore. Early on mana is really a problem right now, just because Assassin's Blessing just doesn't give that much mana. But if you have like 1 or 2 core items, or you have Transcendence, that issue is kind of resolved, or you can even go for Talaria in that context. Tip 3, map awareness. As a jungler, it's really important to know who is where at all times. This knowledge will give you the general idea and direction of where you need to be and if it's safe. I recommend to all players, experienced or starter, and not just junglers, that is general advice, go to your HUD and put the minimap as close to the center of your screen as possible so you can pay attention to it without having to look away from what's happening. Being aware of who is where and will give you the opportunity to see if it's possible to gank or invade buffs, since those are things you want to look for to get ahead of the enemy jungler and or put the enemy team behind. This is in a way connected to tip 1, but more oriented towards the general flow of the game and not just the farming part. I will say I used to have the HUD close to my center of the map for a long time, or the HUD close to the center of my character, but I had the issue that because of that I had to lower the transparency and it kind of felt like I was paying less attention to the map that way. So I will just say put the map in a place where you know that you're looking at it and make it the size that you feel is suitable for that, instead of going for one option that one person proposes. Just feel what feels best for you, but make sure you're looking at the map. Scream. Learn a good early pathing for XP efficiency. Know that XP is more valuable than gold early game because of the way assassins scale, and keeping track of timers and tracking the other jungler. Captain Twig. My best tip as a new jungler would be to focus on farming. If you can really work out how to best farm in a way that doesn't take away too much farm from your lane, while also staying even or ahead, you're on the right track. Try to have jungle on cooldown as much as possible while also sharing when jungle isn't up. Focus on securing mid camps, most importantly, as that is the neutral farm. Ganking should be mostly done out of opportunity rather than forced. I agree with the ganking out of opportunity part. I don't agree with the mid camp. I think secure mid camps to have that neutral farm over your opponent and get ahead of your opponent is great. But I've seen quite a few junglers recently that prioritized mid camps over everything else. And that's just not good. If you take the mid camps, but the enemy jungler invades your blue buff at the same time, or your purple buff, then you're still making a loss, because then they have their own camp to farm afterwards, and you want to have those buff camp down. You want to have all the buffs dropped on the ground at all times, so your team has the buffs, and not the enemy, and because they give a ton of XP, and the mid camps do give decent XP, but aren't as valuable in that context. So when you have your own buffs down, then you can focus on the mid camps. But I wouldn't prioritize the mid camps over the buffs. Weaken. Farm your jungle, don't focus on splitting waves. Gank anytime the other team is down on health, actives, or overextending in a lane. Is it better to gank or farm? Or is it very situational? Q or Fred, it's very situational whether to gank or farm. Adapting, it's important to try to farm and gank as much as possible. If there's a lane you want to gank, make sure there are farming possibilities around that area. It's like a safety net. If you go for a gank and it fails and there's no farm around, a wave to leech, a small buff camp up or spawning, you will start falling behind the enemy's players and jungler. I think that's a very important point, and there's something that I personally don't pay enough attention to yet. Just making sure that there's some farm around that you can clear up afterwards, instead of trying to go for the gank after clearing everything and then realizing that you're kind of wasting time. Ice Ice Baby. I'd say it's god dependent when you want to start prioritizing ganks over farm, but definitely early game pre-level 13 your focus should be on farming. Even further on up, until you're 5 items into your build, you should look to farm unless your team wants to group up so you can do objectives, be it pushing towers, Gold Fury, Pyramids, or Fire Giant. I think it's interesting because basically Ice Ice completely skips the part of ganking at all and just focus on farming. I think this kind of ignores a bit the factor that you can also get lanes ahead, but I can see where he's coming from, especially, again, if it's more oriented towards beginners. Captain Twig, ganking should mostly be done out of opportunity rather than forced. Weaken, it's never better to only focus on ganking or only focus on farming. The balance of the two is what makes you a jungler. So no one here says you should always gank over farming. Some prefer farming and some want like a medium balance between most at all times. I think Adapting's point here is probably the most crucial one. Just gank at places where you can also farm if the gank fails. If you want to dominate in the jungle as an assassin in Smite Season 5, take the advice of these pros with you. Whether you want to know which guards are viable or beginner friendly, how to build your role, or how to strategize, these guys have plenty of tips you can try out in your next match. Keep an eye out for more pro advice as we dive deeper into Season 5, but if you're already here, click on the links all the other stuff that we've talked about, which was hunter support mid laners. So I think this is very interesting. I will put the link down below. You've heard my input on it as well now. I'm going to keep this brief because I've been talking for a very long time by now. I thank you guys very much for watching. I hope this was interesting, and I hope this makes you maybe check out the other ones as well. I will probably talk about the other guides at a later point too. I hope to see you all for the next ones tomorrow. And if you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and the bell. It really helps me out. DukeSloth out.